3, 2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. This is one of my favorite portions of the programming around here. We don't get together too often, but when we do, the dust usually flies. He is the longtime Orioles leader of things back in the 1980s and early 1990s. Marty Conway now sits at Georgetown University trying to educate young people and travels the world educating folks about sports and the business of sports and the world of sports. Marty, I've put the groove lighting on here because sometimes the lighting in here makes my eyes dry out a little bit because I just want to sit back and hear your thoughts on where we are with Orioles baseball now that we've wound them up and, 2,500, 3,000 friends and family gathering on 80-degree nights in April, thanks global warming. I remember when the April nights used to just be, not sweater, blanket weather. I mean, I remember back in the 80s when you were running the team, the Juan Nieves no-hitter night. Yeah, it was a 41-degree night that, and it was crazy cold,
Exactly right. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean, I was out there for that. First off, welcome. How are you? You can follow Marty out of LinkedIn and Twitter and all that. It's been a little while since we got together, and go for it, man. I mean, Oriole baseball, here we go. This is what they're selling, man.
Well, I think it's ironic, maybe even appropriate, that they're playing Oakland as we speak and in the next few days because this is looking a lot like this environment, for sports environment, for the baseball team in particular, is looking to be reflective of Oakland. The Golden State Warriors are leaving. They played their last game. They're moving to San Francisco. The Oakland Raiders clearly are moving, and they're headed to Vegas in a year or two. And I don't think at the moment you should be concerned that the teams here would be leaving because these stadiums that were put in place as a result of the Colts moving, I think has insulated the situation. But surrounding the quality of the stadiums and the infrastructure that they have, the corporate support, as you know, when you see Monday nights, and Monday nights are going to be your lowest night in baseball because in terms of how full season plans and mini plans and all that lay out, Mondays is pretty much just your full season ticket holders plus any walk-up or groups of things that you do. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are generally when you have more mini plans rolled in. So you'll see the numbers a scale in that kind of way.
And there's used to be nights where you would give something away to try to get people out during a weeknight, and the weekend was its own thing. You didn't need to give stuff away on weekends to get people to
Monday nights would be bargain nights. You'd have ticket discounts on top of those things because you don't get many groups on a Monday or different things like that. But having said that, the number there, 65-85 that they announced, which we know is just tickets sold, not people in the house, is reflective of a full season night. Now, again, some people may take their season tickets and they have a very a progressive exchange policy, so you can move them to other nights. You can take 4 tickets and turn them into 8 on one night. They're very liberal in that regard, so you can't take that literally. But what it does give you a strong indication as to the level of full season ticket sales in the community. And it's probably lower than it's ever been. As hard as they might be working now with new people, it's probably as low as it's ever been. And you should be concerned about that, along with vacancies in the outfield walls where there could be signage, Leg Mason in particular, some of the people announcing that they're not coming back. I've heard some others, I'm not going to say now, that are not renewing for their sports sponsorships in the city. And it's getting particularly concerning because at the base of all this, it's about corporate support. And I take you back to the mid-1980s when.
But by the way, that harkens back to WNST too, right? We're built on corporate support, right?
Right.
All of it. I mean, the media that surrounds it, the city, the Marriott, the Hyatt, the Ruth's Chris, my restaurant sponsors, Federal Hill, all of it is built around this working.
Right. And in particular for baseball, because the 81 home games, now the Ravens can truck their stuff down for 8 home games and 2 preseasons and a practice here and there, and they do other things in the city. But in terms of bringing a bulk of people down, the Ravens might bring 700,000 people over the course of their regular season. The Orioles right now may not do 1.3 million. We'll see what happens. And you start to see that what it begins to look like the environment in Tampa or Oakland, and maybe the upside here in the future is Cleveland, right? And that's what you want to be concerned about. And so that's a significance. And I take you back to that middle 1980 period when it was a concern when the Colts had left and looked like perhaps the Orioles were in doubt, and they formed the designated hitter club, and they got 30 or 50 corporate individuals to go out and round up other corporate support. And over that period of time, over the next 5 or 10 years, and then the new stadium comes along, you drove that to a really high full and partial season ticket community of people buying in advance, not worried about the weather, not worried about who's playing and all these different things.
It's an incredibly precipitous fall when you consider where the carnivals were back in the 90s, where literally they would sell out the stadium before Christmas for the year.
Right.
Because you would buy your tickets and put them under a Christmas tree, and somebody would just be happy to have August the 14th, or their birthday against the Twins in the upper deck just to be at Camden. I mean, it's an incredible... It was Disney World. Everyone had to come and everyone had to be there, and now no one wants to be. I mean, it's really I would think for a guy like you who built it, it's got to be disturbing to watch this, man.
It is, and because you know what's possible, and you can see what's happened in other markets and other communities, including what's happened in Washington, 40 miles from home plate at Camden Yards, and yes, the presence of that ball club has taken some of the surrounding community away from Orioles and put them in a National League environment. I ride the Metro. I drive my car down there. I see people going to games at midday. They're wearing Cardinals gear, Cubs gear, Dodgers gear, all that kind of stuff. And so I see that. But what you're mostly concerned about is because the top 3 revenue sources for your club is going to be national TV revenues, which come into the league and then get redistributed to the clubs, local television revenue, okay, which you derive here, and we'll talk about Masson in a minute, and then commercial sponsorships and relationships is the third. So whether that's sponsorships on the outfield walls, whether it's season tickets, giveaway days, all those types of things, those 3 things compose the bulk of the revenues for a franchise like that. And so the difference between, and the reason why the NFL works is the NFL can deliver to a club like the Ravens $250 million of national TV revenues, which more than covers the salary cap, plus others. Now, if they want to be more profitable, they tend to sell more local relationships like the Redskins or other people like that. So there's no risk there in that regard. And I don't think there's any risk with Major League Baseball because their TV deals and national distribution are solid and continue to grow. But in terms of the profitability and why you see a mid-$50 million payroll this year, it has a lot to do, yes, with a rebuild, but also I think has a lot to do with the revenue lines in some of these areas, which are trending backwards, and that should be a concern for people because given the environment in the city and the surrounding area, that may be difficult to turn around unless there's some sort of miracle that occurs on the field, which it doesn't look like is happening. And I bring you back to the environments in Oakland, the environments in Tampa, places like that, where you have to sell off players to get more prospects back. And that's very difficult, and it makes for uncertain futures like they have in Oakland and Tampa about where that stadium's going to be and what's the community support.
Well, Marty, I'm going to write next week, maybe in honor of it just being a little slow, and I want it for baseball season to begin, and I want to get people's attention before summer comes and the boats and Ocean City and whatever the kids are doing in June or July and August when no one is paying attention to baseball. Like literally, at least we had people's attention here for a little while. I am inking a letter to the Angelos boys and to Steve Bisciotti, who has somehow evaporated now. He's not taking questions any longer. Ted Leonsis has got his hockey team down there, bringing up his Arena Football League team here that nobody... Where are the sportsmen who we and you at one point, the Edward Bennett Williams and your brethren and Larry Lucchino and the William Donald Schaefers that all went together to say this was important, this was our Disney World, this was our reason to get people from Havre de Grace and Elkton and Cumberland and Ocean City and Salisbury and Cumberland to come to Baltimore above and beyond the Science Center, above and beyond the aquarium, above and beyond maybe a nice dinner downtown or a stroll in the harbor or something with the War of 1812 or some fireworks or Light City or the Preakness, which we're about to lose. Marty, this is I'm a little shaken by all of this. I've had my condo on the market the last 6 months. My wife can't walk down the streets. They played baseball games with no one in attendance, and now Coward's writing books glorifying that. I had him on a couple of weeks ago, and you can go listen to that in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. But the baseball side of this is, what is their responsibility in all of this? It seems to be lost that Edward Bennett Williams brought the team, brought the stadium, kept the team here, did all of that because he really sort of even in some weird way cared about Baltimore, even though he wasn't a Baltimorean, and thought that the team would always be better at the Inner Harbor here, where it was a big deal, than maybe getting swallowed up in Washington back then. And Washington was maybe Donald Trump called third world country. I thought Washington was an S-hole back in the 80s when I went down to the Bayou. Washington was a place no one from Baltimore wanted to go then. And now I go down to Washington, it's like, man, look at the restaurants. It feels safe. We can walk around. It's nice here. It's gentrified. It's all of that. It's really an incredible thing the last 30 years, what's happened to these two metropolises and in and around their sports franchises, right?
Yeah, no, it's important because the area that resides where the current Capital One, formerly Verizon Center, formerly MCI Center sits, prior to that being there, that was an area, a 4, 5, 6 block square area you didn't go near. You didn't get off the metro there. You wouldn't walk anywhere near there. Extremely dangerous. The same part where you went down to where Nationals Park is and now Audi Field for DC United, 10, 15 years ago, that was an area that you didn't want to be near because there were drug deals and dead bodies and things like that. So that gentrification and that and sort of the redevelopment has occurred in Washington, and yes, it has helped turn that around. Baltimore had somewhat of a head start on that because, building M&T and Camden Yards really solidified that. But I take you back to what you said early in your conversation right there where you're talking about sportsmen. These were people, Edward Bennett Williams in particular, who was a branded sportsman. He owned the franchise for the purpose of winning and competition and being a part of it. In terms of asset valuations and gambling and sports betting and increasing all the revenues around it and owning the real estate and all those things that you see today were not something that was particularly essential or important to him. And as a result, all the focus went into who's the manager, who's the general manager, can we win, what's the farm system like, all that sort of stuff. We don't have that anymore in our current environments with our respective owners. They are good and they generate revenue in a lot of ways, but their obligation goes beyond that. Their obligation goes to really be a presence and I think get involved and be visible and be out front at these types of things. And I go back to my experience with the Texas Rangers when one of the most visible people sitting in the first row of almost every game was George W. Bush because he loved baseball and he wanted to be in that front row. He had a box. He gave it away to his guests and family and other people, and he sat down in the front row. Nolan Ryan sat down in the front row when he was general manager of the team. That visibility, that presence matters. People would come up, ask for an autograph, have a quick conversation, and then go back to their seats.
And come back again and watch on TV the next night and come to the Fan Fest.
That's something that is lost because it gives people confidence as a part of that. And that's what's required, particularly in a community like Baltimore, which is really more of a city of neighborhoods than it is like a Kansas City or Seattle or a place like that. Now, again, there are huge macro problems going on around the city and the community, as you know, and you're taking steps to try to do what you can to remedy that. But having said that, first of all, the ownership groups anymore don't talk to each other. You don't see any relationship between the Orioles and the Ravens or the Ravens and the Capitals or whatever those environments are. They're social media friendly, but that's about it. And I think that has a lot to do with where we've gotten to, which is everybody has gotten their own stadium. And so it's literally every man for themselves with regard to generating revenues, making media deals, sports betting, gambling, all the things that are becoming a part of that process. And so I think, and in particular,
by the way, this might be the best chat we've ever had. Seriously, man, because that's the real. That's what's really going on here. Is there is no partnership. It's every man for himself, right? And I guess that's going on amongst the banks. That's going on amongst the advertising agencies. That's going on amongst Walmart and Target. That's going on amongst the liquor store. That's where we are. And
Right.
That's not the way it used to be when it's good, right? I mean, there really is a partnership part of all of this that begat this ever happening, that the two kids born on third base and think they hit a triple have no idea about, or have an idea about, but don't have the blood on the bricks to understand that. I mean, we learned this week that Masson's not even paying the Lerner family now, right? We learned that in the Hollywood Reporter of all places, right?
Yeah. So let me get to that in a second, but you make a good point to finish, which is, this has now become sort of like a zero-sum game, right? These are mutually exclusive franchises, almost as if they have completely different plans, different business plans, and different objectives and all that, when in fact we know that that's not the case. And I would use as an example of after their careers were over, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton getting together to generate, and George H.W. Bush and all this, and the relationship between the Clinton and the Bush family, when I was working for George with the Rangers, it was you could not get the two of them within 500 miles of each other. But after that, they were able to settle their differences, come together, raise money for Haiti and all the other good projects that they had. And it was just a sense to people like it was time to bury old issues, put the common interests together, and to go forward. And I have said, I think you and I have talked about this for a while, until you see that in the sport community with respect to what's happening in the Baltimore community, the wider community, I don't think either team is going to have the kind of success that they would have if there was a very public, front between two or three groups to come together and a sustained messaging that, number one, it's safe to come downtown. Number two, you should support the projects and the businesses that support us, and actively go down the list and say, these are the people that support us. We'd like to see you support them, which will bring in more people to do that. Until you have both organizations or all three organizations, including the Valor in Washington, come together and to do that, I don't think you're effectively going to move this forward, because everybody's going to get their piece and it's going to be the same thing. And at some point, someone is left out, which brings us to the media situation with Masson, right? This is now a 7-year Cold War, and what you're referring to is the last shot fired, if you will, by lawyers in the Cold War, is that the payouts that come from the ownership equity, and right now the Orioles own 74% of Masson, and the Nats own the rest.
It's down to 74. I remember when it was 87. That's how far into this thing we are now, right? We're going 15 years of Nationals baseball, right?
At the end of every year, whatever profits remain, it's divided basically 75-25, and that will continue until the Orioles own 67%, the Nats own 33%, and that's what it'll stay in perpetuity. So what's happening right now is those equity payments, which are paid periodically through the year, Masson has stopped paying not only the Nationals, but I spent 2 hours yesterday reading legal documents. They've also stopped paying the Orioles as well, because Masson is coming up on a period of renegotiation with their cable providers, so the Comcasts and the Time Warners and the Coxes of the world, to recarry the network. And I can assure you that those carriage deals are going to be for less money per subscriber than they were in the past, and there's going to be less subscribers because people have been cutting cable for a period of 4, 5, or 6 years.
I wish I could get off that dope.
The rationale for them holding back the money is that they're uncertain about the future of some of those carriage deals, and so in the interest of the profitability and the ongoing nature of the network, they're holding off on essentially paying out those funds. That should be concerning, because the single largest underpinning of revenue, other than national revenue coming from Major League Baseball, coming to the Orioles, is from their local TV provider. Something like $40-45 or so million a year.
And they won't have to look far from that, because it's in their right hand and they own their left hand, right? Like literally, that's what this is.
And so this 7-year war that's been going on, okay, and these sides are not talking to each other. When the time comes to resolve, they have a contractual obligation to try to resolve themselves. And then when it doesn't, they go to an American Arbitration Association, or they go to this Major League Baseball tribunal. This has been going on to the point where in 2014, Bud Selig in the court filings made it clear to both sides that should either side go outside of Major League Baseball's own process, that he was prepared to bring down the most serious of sanctions on either franchise. So this is in 2014. Well, they went ahead and did that. And so now it's spilled out into the open over and over again. And I believe that this is the future here is such that I think the Nationals clearly don't want to have anything to do with Masson. They would love to see it drop into just the Orioles themselves, and they'd like to be able to go on about their way and sell their TV rights to somebody else, whether it's NBC Washington or somebody else, and leave the Orioles to their own, and they split up the marketplace. If that were to happen, that's going to be another huge issue for the Orioles because they have a smaller TV market than Washington does. The only way that this works for the Orioles is they get to hang on to, as when they're combined with the Nationals, is they get to hang on to both markets essentially and funnel money coming into Washington and convert it into Baltimore. This was part of the deal that Peter Angelos and his team struck in 2005 when the Nationals came from Montreal. Otherwise, if we didn't have this, Major League Baseball would have had a huge lawsuit, which they would have lost, and probably had to pay somewhere between $200 and $300 million in damages to the Orioles franchise for bringing a team into a territory that Major League Baseball had already recognized was the Orioles.
$200 or $300 million would have been a bargain at that point. I mean, literally,
that's right.
In retrospect now, everybody mismanaged this, and Angelos has sucked every crab out of the ocean, and it's all sitting in his piggy bank, and they're trying to come get it. I mean, that's literally what's happened here. I mean, all of the Masson money has been on his side, minus the $29 million or whatever they had agreed to give the Nationals until now they don't give them anything. And, Marty, the dirty secret of all of this, and it really is the headline of all of this, is that the more they've strangled their own franchise of funds, i.e., not signing a Manny Machado and, going all in on they went all the wrong guy with Chris Davis, but they've also strangled the Nationals. And because one is the other. You hurt one, you don't feed one child, you don't feed either child. And they've been doing that for 12 years too, sort of artificially to line their own pockets. I mean, that money was designed to strengthen both of these franchises and make them the Yankees and the Mets. And instead they've sort of dangled around and pretended to be sort of the Cardinals or the Astros or something like that, right?
Yeah, I'll give you a similar example in a second. But the predicate was in the first 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, the contract was in place. The Nats were paid their money. It was firm, whatever. This began in 2011 and into 2012 when the contract allowed for a revision to the rights fees. Both sides took a different position. The Nats thought it was worth $120 million. The Orioles and Masson thought it was worth about $35 or $39 million, and that's what led to this whole process. Now, that was also predicated, this methodology of figuring out what each team should get was predicated on Masson, TSR Sports, which is the entity, maintaining a 20% profit margin throughout, okay? So imagine that. You hold this asset, you believe that you, in perpetuity or for 30 years, you're going to be getting a 20% profit. You calculate what your part is, what you're giving to your partner, and you say over 30 years or 25 years, this is what we're going to make. And maybe that's $450 million instead of the $250 that they would have gotten from a judgment had they taken it to court. That's what they're fighting against, which is to try to hang on to. Now, I can tell you that the reason why these don't work between two teams is you have to look no further than in Chicago, where the Cubs just recently, after 20 years being in the same relationship with the Cubs, the White Sox, the Blackhawks, and the Bulls, they broke out, and now they're doing their own TV network, Marquee Sports, or whatever it's going to be called. They don't want to share with anybody, okay? So there's precedent for what they're doing.
Well, that's Major League Baseball. The George Steinbrenner didn't want to share with anybody. That goes back to 40 years ago, right?
You saw a whole cycle of the 60s and 70s where teams shared stadiums between football and baseball, and then starting in the early 90s with Camden Yards and Joe Robbie Stadium and other places like that, it began to separate. We have a separate baseball and a separate football stadium, and now we want our own separate media entities and all these different things, real estate, all these other components as a part of it. There just isn't enough to go around. We're in a bull market, 10 years plus running, unprecedented, low unemployment, low inflation. That's not going to last. And when that shoe drops, whether it's in 2 years or 5 years, some of these situations are going to turn to say, we don't have the cash flow to pay our debt service. What are we going to do? You don't want to be in that position when that shoe drops, whenever that shoe drops. And it happens eventually for everybody somewhere along the line. It happened to the Miami Marlins, and he had to sell and this comes up periodically.
He is Marty Conway. We've been trying to figure this out a long, long time. You can follow him out on LinkedIn as well as at Twitter. He's at Georgetown University, traveling the world, doing stuff. Sort of last thing for you before I get to Springsteen. The Orioles and where they are right now, let's take it full circle back to the beginning of this conversation, which is they got to play a lot of baseball games and figure this out along the way and deal with various 13-2 beatdowns that they're going to endure here this year. Man, if you and I take the team over, what's the first thing you do? You know, I mean, I don't know what the remedy is when you're going to lose this much, but you got to try to find and make new fans. And I just think the MASN broadcasts are, I mean, they're wretched unto themselves, right? But Palmer, Davis, all of these guys, none of them understand modern baseball as it's going to be played under Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal. It's almost like they need to have an analytics conference for the few people left who might want to get on that train to some degree, but they're just riding that train to the end with the old people and the old ways, and they're not even discussing the game in the way that teaches me things, which is I need to learn these analytic things if they want me to be a fan 10 years from now, because I'm already getting to the point, Marty, and maybe you're there too, where you don't really recognize the game when Chris Davis comes up to bat and they've got, you know, it feels like 12 guys on the right side of the field, you know?
Well, we poll from time to time the students in our class, which are a pretty good representation of people in their early, mid, late 20s or maybe sometimes early 30s. And I asked them last week, what about Chris Davis? Not one hand up. You know why? Nobody saw it. Nobody heard about it. Nobody saw it. And you talked about the media component. So the way that it's currently structured, with cable distribution and no streaming, and radio and no local streaming, you have an entire category, a cohort of individuals, men and women and girls, who don't see this at all. And they don't have any idea what's going on. Okay? And this is not a joke. And so when you look at the broadcasters, Jim Palmer, fine. He's a great Hall of Famer, studies into his 70s. He's on social media, but barely. Like the whole concept of the back and forth between people like yourselves and others that are very active and have a high social media profile, they're nowhere near the broadcast for the most part. And so that makes a huge difference because people don't know who they are. Some of my younger students don't know who Jim Nantz is. Like they just don't know who these people are. You have to understand that where they get their information and entertainment and sports news from is not from cable and it's not from terrestrial radio. And so unless you have active programming in these other areas, and I mean super aggressive programming, look, we can disagree about whether we think Barstool Sports is appropriate for some people, but they're 1, 2, or 3 in all the listings because they are where the younger population and cohort is. And so you may not like that, and it may not fit with your image, but if you're looking to reach those people, to either buy tickets, come out, socialize, do whatever, that's what you have to do. And so I think when you say where to start, of all the things that you could do, that's where you start. And it has to be almost a media programming on steroids. And I know that the clubs are doing some of their whatever loyalty programming things, but also understand that the infrastructure at Camden Yards, and I mean Wi-Fi, point-of-purchase systems at the concession
It didn't work. I could not put Facebook statuses up, and the stadium wasn't full.
So the POS, the point of sale, this was told to me by somebody who's fairly familiar with it, is essentially one step above a calculator. Like it's 20 years old. And I think what you're going to see is the lease agreement expires in 2022, which means you have to be negotiating that now and next year. That is probably going to be the single biggest event that comes because that's going to unlock $100 or $200 million perhaps, probably as much as it cost to build the stadium, which was $100 million, in renovations in those electronic areas because that's how far behind Camden Yards. This is a great place to go watch a game in the solitude of 6,000 people. But at the end of the day, even with 30,000 people there on opening day, it's just not functional. And so people recognize that. And like I've said before, this is a frequency thing. People will come once. They won't come 4 times. In order to draw 2.7, 2.8, 3 million, you're going to have to get the frequency up because the population of Baltimore and surrounding and people coming in from New York is only so much. And so that's what you have to do. But that takes infrastructure. It's going to take investment, and it will take kind of a mobile and media strategy that right now is, they're just not doing. And I'm not sure why, but some of it has to do with the level of investment, the ownership situation being tenuous with Peter being in such failing health. But Major League Baseball has said by June, we want to know who the controlling ownership is. And they're serious about that because they see all the numbers. And I'm sure they're overly concerned at this point about kind of the direction financially of the franchise.
He is Marty Conway. We're going to get to some Springsteen at some point down the road, further on up the road, as we'd say, and Born to Run and all that stuff. We got to get Bruce back out on the road. Miss you, man. We're going to get a ball game in at some point around here. We got the hockey playoffs happening and all that stuff, but we'll make some time. Always a pleasure to visit with you, man.
Okay, bud. Thanks.
Marty Conway can be found down at Georgetown University. He can be found on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and anywhere that thoughtful people follow sports and the business of sports. You can find me out in the Buy at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those places that you hide on your internet. We are. WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.